Populism is a political ideology that promotes the interests of the common people against a so-called political establishment. The term's first use was by a French statesman named Alphonse de Lamartine as an antithesis to the term aristocratic. Now you may notice that the definition is rather vague, and that is by design. It's why I put air quotes around political ideology, as it's not necessarily an ideology in and of itself. It is more of a rhetoric style that ideologies build themselves around. As long as they can follow 4 simple rules in their rhetoric put out by political scientist Ben Stanley, anybody can claim to be a populist. 1. Acknowledge the existence of 2 homogeneous units of analysis, the people and the elite. 2. Show an antagonistic relationship between the people and the elite. 3. Push for the idea of popular sovereignty, that the government is given power by the people. And 4. Give a positive valorization of the people while denigrating the elite. But again, this is all very vague and means nothing, which is again, by design. A vast majority of the people hate the elite and support the people. But depending on what kind of populist you get, who is considered the people and the elite change very drastically. The 2 main ideological forms of populism are of course left-wing and right-wing, which despite certain similarities can also have very different ideas on who is the enemy and how they should combat them. Left-wing populism focuses on ideas of social progress to help those historically oppressed, criticize capitalism as it is the dominant economic ideology, and broadly reject the so-called Washington Consensus on foreign policy, whereas right-wing populism is very socially reactionary, extremely nationalistic, and on paper opposed to the status quo, but offers very little to differentiate it from traditional conservatism, while also teetering on conspiracy theories. While left-wing populists usually put the blame on the world's issues on the top 1% and the systems that led them to get there, the right-wing populists typically scapegoat a minority group that has borderline no power as the reason there's problems, the most common scapegoat being a certain 0.2%, but they will also go after a certain 25%, a certain 10%, and a certain 0.6%. But I would be remiss to not also note that it is not necessarily mutually exclusive. There are many left-wing populists that also have very nationalistic views. There's even a term for it, left-wing nationalism. And there are some people who claim to be left-wing populists that also scapegoat certain minority groups. And a couple of left populists aren't not exactly immune to conspiracism, but for the most part, left populists don't do that, while right populists do. So barring very rare circumstances, these 2 cannot reconcile their views because they have such vastly different outlooks and plans for the world. Literally, the only form of agreement they have is the elite bad and people good, and find me any politician that will openly say the opposite. Every politician campaigns as a populist, because it's mostly the people who decide who wins an election. It's the framework that you build your ideology off of. It would be foolish to base your entire political ideology on just populism, which is why it is very perplexing that people do that. Ranging from online pundits, the fans that follow them, and politicians that jump on board the populist train basically as a form of contrarianism. Now, those that went to their specific wing of populism is one thing, but in the rise of populism in general, there's been a rising third section that has tried their best to try and appeal to both sides of the aisle. Now, how are you able to appeal to people with 2 completely different outlooks on the world and form a coherent ideology around that? The answer is actually very simple. They don't. Because it's just not possible. Your only form of agreement is a sentence. These 2 people look at this specific sentence and see vastly different interpretations of the world. Do you genuinely think that Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump could form a political party together? Or Jair Bolsonaro and Lula da Silva? Absolutely not, because while they all can agree on the statement, the people are good and the establishment is bad, at least on paper, what that actually means is completely different to all of them. A similarly vapid political statement that can seemingly unite these people is the statement of the real divide isn't left versus right, but it's the people versus the establishment. A statement that is completely meaningless because these two see the word establishment and think vastly different things. Every time this happens in practice, what usually happens is that the left-wing populists are forced to make concessions to the right-wing populists, and the right-wing populists don't do anything. So this big tent of populism just became a right-wing populist movement. The only time these statements can ever really work are when you're an online figure that can literally just say whatever the heck you want and not face any repercussions about it. But if you're actually trying to go so far as to try and form a political party to espouse this ideology, you're going to be completely screwed. And here are 3 examples that prove my case. We'll start off with the smallest of the bunch, the Movement for a People's Party, a group that started out as an attempt to start a third party for Bernie Sanders to run on in the year 2020, but turned against him because he said no, which would then form into a small political cult surrounding its leader, Nick Brana, who, after being accused of sexual assault and then holding rallies with the Trump-controlled Libertarian Party, would magically shift his rhetoric into being a right-wing anti-vaxxer. Joined up with the Trump-backed spoiler candidacy of RFK Jr., before quietly fading away as essentially they are just Trump supporters now. Another American political party that tried to do a similar thing was the Forward Party, a party started by Andrew Yang, who wanted to mimic the Bernie and Trump movements of 2016 for his own pet issues of universal basic income, electoral reform, and human-centered capitalism. But an issue arose when Yang chose to make his movement non-ideological, which opened the tent too wide that when Yang moved forward with the creation of his own political party, he dropped basically everything that made his movement unique. And now, the Forward Party is... I can't even really describe it. It's basically nothing. But I'd argue the most embarrassing of these groups is the Five Star Movement, an Italian political party formed in 2009 by a comedian that wanted to say vaffanculo to the entire Italian political system, building itself up as an antithesis of the 2 main parties in Italy at the time, which led to a problem when the party won enough seats to become Italy's governing party, and what ensued was multiple government crises and a massive drop in support for the party in the following election, because the Five Star Movement based itself more on what it was against as opposed to what it was for, because they had nothing beyond the message, people good, establishment bad. Populism is in and of itself not a bad idea. I mean, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you, would identify as a populist as well. But I'm saying, basing your entire ideology on the idea of populism and nothing more is just kind of vapid and shows a very shallow interpretation of politics. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click that bell to inform when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, consider supporting me on Patreon.